My father was laughing. Not nervous laughter. Not the uncomfortable kind. A full settled laugh, the kind that comes out when a man has already solved a problem and is just waiting for the last piece to fall into place. And I was that piece. I just didn't know it yet. I was standing on a porch in the dark in Atlanta, Georgia, still wearing my hospital badge, and I had just heard my entire family discuss how to spend my money without asking me a single question. I need you to sit with that for a second. My name is Simone. I'm 36 years old. I'm a charge nurse in the ICU at a major hospital in Atlanta, and I have spent most of my adult life being the person everyone calls when something goes wrong. Not because I volunteered. Because somewhere along the way, my family decided that my competence was their safety net, and nobody ever asked me if I was okay with that arrangement. I want to tell you what happened on that Tuesday evening in October, because I think you might recognize something in this story. Not the exact details, your family might be completely different from mine, but the feeling. That particular, awful feeling of realizing that the people who love you have been quietly, confidently counting on your inability to say no. If you've ever felt that, even once, I need you to keep watching, because what happened next changed everything. I had just come off a double shift, 14 hours in the ICU, which meant 14 hours of alarms and decisions and keeping my face calm while people's family members fell apart in the hallway. By the time my husband Marcus picked me up from the hospital, I was the kind of tired that lives in your bones. Not your body, your bones. He asked if I wanted to skip dinner at my parents' place, and I told him no. My mother had called that morning, said she just wanted to see us, said it wouldn't be long. Just family, just food, just a normal evening. Nothing about what happened next was normal. Marcus waited in the car while I walked ahead to let my parents know we'd arrived. Our house wasn't far from theirs, maybe 12 minutes on a good Atlanta night, and my parents lived in the kind of neighborhood in Decatur where everyone knows everyone, and front porches still matter. I walked up the steps slowly. The lights were on inside. I could hear voices. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I want to be clear about that. I was simply tired and slow, and I paused at the top of the steps because my back was aching, and I needed one breath before I knocked. That one breath is the reason everything changed. My father's voice came through first, low and unhurried, the way he speaks when a decision has already been made, and he's simply letting people know. He was talking about money. He was talking about my brother Devontae's debt, a number that made my stomach drop when I heard it spoken so casually, like a grocery list item. And then he said something that stopped my hand mid-air, an inch from the door. Simone will handle it. She always does. She's not going to say no, she never says no to us. Just explain it right and she'll cover it. My mother's voice followed. Softer, but just as certain. We'll go to her next week. Give her the full picture. She'll understand. And then Devontae said something I couldn't fully make out. But I heard his tone. Relief. The relief of a man who has just been handed a lifeline he didn't earn. Packaged as a family decision, already gift-wrapped. And then my father laughed. I stood there. I didn't move for what felt like an entire minute. My hand never touched that door. My chest went completely still, not the peaceful kind of still, but the kind that happens right before something cracks or calcifies forever. I thought about every time I had said yes when I didn't want to. Every loan I'd quietly absorbed. Every family crisis I'd managed while managing my own life at the same time. I thought about how I had always told myself they leaned on me because they trusted me. Because they believed in me. Because I was capable. Standing on that porch in the October dark, I understood for the first time that it had never been about belief. It had always been about access. I turned around. I walked back to the car. I sat down in the passenger seat and closed the door very carefully, like I was afraid of what would happen if I let any of what I was feeling out too fast. Marcus looked at me immediately. He's always been able to read my face before I've finished processing what's on it. He said, "Baby, what happened?" I told him. Every word, every laugh, every syllable of that conversation that had been happening in my parents' living room while I was still in scrubs from saving someone else's life at work. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He didn't try to soften it or offer an alternative explanation. He just listened, really listened the way almost nobody had ever listened to me in that family. And when I finished, he sat back in the driver's seat and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Simone, first thing tomorrow morning, I need you to move everything out of your personal accounts." I looked at him. "Everything?" "Everything," he said. And his voice was not panicked. It was not angry. It was the calmest, most certain thing I had heard all day. Move your savings, your overtime deposits, everything that's only yours. Move it somewhere your name is the only name on it. Do it before anyone in that house has a chance to call you and frame this as an emergency. I didn't argue. Something about the way he said it. Not cold, not vindictive, just completely clear and protective, made me trust him in a way I don't know if I'd ever trusted anyone before. He wasn't thinking about what was convenient. He was thinking about me. And I realized, sitting in that car in front of my parents' house, that I could count on one hand the number of times in my life someone had put me first, without me having to ask. We didn't go inside. I texted my mother that I wasn't feeling well. That wasn't entirely untrue. I felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with anything physical. We drove home almost in silence. Marcus held my hand the entire way. His thumb moved slowly back and forth across my knuckles, like he was trying to keep me from drifting somewhere I couldn't come back from. I stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline and I thought about my father's laugh. I kept coming back to that laugh, the ease of it, the complete absence of discomfort. Because to them, I wasn't a person they were taking something from. I was a system they had always been able to access. Honestly, if that had been me, if I were hearing this story from someone else right now, I don't know if I could have stayed as composed as Simone did in that car. I think I would have gone back inside and said something I could never take back. But she didn't. And the choice she made instead is the reason this story ends the way it does. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about something my grandmother used to say when I was small, that being strong for your family is a gift. I believed that for most of my life. I built my whole identity around it. But somewhere between that porch and that ceiling, I started to wonder if what I'd been giving my family all these years was actually a gift, or just something they'd learned to take. By 6 the next morning, I had done exactly what Marcus said. Every transfer confirmed, every account reorganized, my personal savings in a new account with one name on it. Mine. And as I sat at the kitchen table watching the confirmation emails come in one by one, I felt something I had never felt before in relation to my own money. I felt like it was actually mine. That was a Wednesday. The following Tuesday, my mother knocked on my door. I knew before I even stood up. I don't know how I knew, maybe something in the timing, maybe the rhythm of the knock, 3 short taps that somehow carried the particular energy of someone who has already scripted the next 10 minutes of a conversation. I took a breath. I opened the door. My mother was dressed nicely. She was wearing the pearl earrings she saves for occasions when she needs to make an impression. Behind her, slightly to her left, stood Devante, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes anywhere but mine. "We were nearby," she said, stepping inside with the ease of someone who has never been turned away at a door. "Just wanted to check on you." I let them in. I made tea. I set out cups at my own kitchen table and I sat down across from them and I waited. Marcus was in the office down the hall. I had texted him the moment I saw their car pull into the driveway. I didn't need him to speak. I just needed to know he was close. It took my mother 11 minutes of conversation before she got to it. 11 minutes of asking about my schedule, complimenting the kitchen renovation, telling me Devante had been going through a hard stretch lately. I tracked every minute internally, the way you do in a long procedure when you need to know exactly where you are. And then, with the measured ease of someone who has rehearsed this moment and found it completely reasonable, she said it. Devante had a significant debt. She named the number without flinching. The family had discussed the situation and determined that the most sensible solution was for me to cover it. She said it exactly like that the family had determined, as though I had been present for that determination. As though my agreement had already been included in the calculation before I was ever asked. She added, "He's your brother, Simone. Family takes care of family." I looked at Devante. He was staring at the table. He had the grace, at least, to look uncomfortable. Though not uncomfortable enough to say anything on my behalf, not uncomfortable enough to look at me and say, "I don't want to do this." He just sat there, waiting for me to fold the way everyone in that family had always counted on me folding. I set my cup down, slowly, deliberately, and then I said the word, "No." My mother blinked. The smile she'd been wearing since she walked in didn't vanish immediately. It flickered first the way a candle does right before it goes out, before settling into something harder underneath. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I won't be covering the debt," I said. My voice was steady. I was genuinely surprised by how steady it was. It felt like it was coming from somewhere very deep and very solid inside me, somewhere I hadn't known existed until that moment. I was at the house last week. I came up the porch steps and I heard everything. I heard Dad say I'd handle it. I heard you agree. I heard Devontae's reaction. I know this wasn't a spontaneous visit. I know exactly how this conversation was planned, and I know exactly what role I was supposed to play in it, and my answer is no. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my own home. Marcus came into the kitchen then. He didn't make an entrance. He didn't say anything dramatic. He simply walked in, filled a glass of water at the sink, and stood beside me. His presence alone shifted something in the air. My mother looked at him and then back at me, and I watched her recalibrate. I watched her decide to try a different approach. She leaned forward slightly and her voice got softer. She told me I was being selfish. She said family doesn't keep score. She said I had so much more than Devontae did, and how could I sit here with my nice house and my good job and just refuse my own brother? Every sentence was engineered to make me feel small and cold and irresponsible. She invoked every loan she'd ever given me growing up. She mentioned my grandmother. She mentioned sacrifice. 6 months ago, it would have worked. 6 months ago, I would have been apologizing before she finished the second sentence. I would have convinced myself that maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was making too big a deal out of what was just family being family. I know myself well enough to admit that. The guilt would have landed and taken root before I could even examine it clearly. But something had changed in me on that porch. I had felt it then, a quiet hardening in my chest, like something that had been soft my whole life had finally set. And I felt it now, sitting at my own kitchen table, listening to my mother work her way through her script. Her words were reaching me, and then just stopping, like they'd hit a wall they couldn't get through. I want to stop here for a second, because I think a lot of people watching this know exactly what that guilt sounds like. That specific kind of guilt that only exists in families, the kind that comes dressed as love, that speaks in the language of sacrifice, that makes you feel like your most basic need to protect yourself is somehow a betrayal. If you have ever sat across from someone you love and felt yourself shrinking because of the things they were saying, I see you. This story is for you. My mother tried one more time. She looked me directly in the eyes and said, "After everything we've done for you, Simone, after everything." I took a breath. I felt Marcus beside me still, steady, not saying a word, just there. And I said, "I am genuinely grateful for the ways you've supported me over the years. I love this family, but I am not a financial decision that gets made without my involvement, and then presented to me as though I've already agreed. That is not what family means. That's not love, that's just an assumption. And I won't be honoring it." Devontae looked up from the table when I said that. Just for a second, our eyes met, and I saw something move across his face that I couldn't fully name, not quite shame, not quite understanding, somewhere in between. He looked back down at the table. They left 20 minutes later. My mother walked to the door without speaking. She didn't hug me. Devontae said goodbye so quietly it was almost a breath. I closed the door and I stood in my hallway and I waited to feel what I expected to feel. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought I would feel that familiar knot of anxiety that always came after I disappointed someone in that family. I had been bracing for it since the moment I said no. I was ready for it to hit. It didn't come. What came instead was something I did not have a word for at the time. Something quiet and wide and completely unfamiliar. A kind of stillness that didn't feel like numbness. It felt like space. Like something that had been pressing on my chest for years had simply lifted. Marcus came and stood behind me in the hallway and wrapped his arms around me. He rested his chin on top of my head and didn't say anything for a long moment. "You okay?" he finally asked. "Yeah," I said. And I meant it in a way I hadn't meant much of anything in a very long time. Here's what I've come to understand in the months since that Tuesday afternoon. My family didn't set out to use me. I genuinely believe that. My mother doesn't think of herself as someone who exploits people. She thinks of herself as someone who manages a family, who solves problems efficiently, who knows which levers to pull. And for most of my life, I was her most reliable lever. Not because she's a monster. Because I let her be right about me. I never cost her anything. I never pushed back. I was always available, always capable, always there. And what you're always available for eventually stops feeling like a favor and starts feeling like a feature, a built-in function, something that just runs in the background and doesn't require maintenance. The mistake I made, and I need to own this, because this story isn't just about my family's choices. The mistake I made was believing that being needed was the same thing as being loved. It took me 36 years and a single overheard conversation on a porch in Decatur to understand that those are not the same thing. Not even close. What Simone understood in that moment, what I hope you take from this story, is that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of the people you love. It is, in fact, the only way to build relationships that are actually real. Because a relationship built on your inability to say no is not a relationship. It's a dependency with a family photo on the wall. The one thing I'd ask you to do today, just one, is think about the place in your life where someone is counting on you to stay silent. Where your compliance has become so predictable that it's been factored into someone else's plans before you were even consulted. You don't have to blow anything up. You don't have to have a confrontation tomorrow. But you do have to notice it, because you cannot change what you refuse to see. And the question I'd leave you with is this. When was the last time someone in your life asked what you needed without an agenda attached to your answer? Now, before I let you go, I genuinely want to know what you think about this. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think Simone made the right call. Drop a 2 if you think she could have handled it differently but still respect her. Drop a 3 if this story hit closer to home than you expected. I read every single comment, and I am not kidding when I say your responses shape which stories I bring to this channel next. Also, where are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are right now? I love knowing where this community is spread across the world. And if you have ever been the person in your family that everyone assumes will say yes, tell me about it below. You might be surprised how many people are sitting with the exact same thing. If this story meant something to you, the best thing you can do is subscribe to this channel. New stories come out regularly. Stories about real human moments, about the choices people make when they're finally done being convenient, about the quiet revolutions that happen in ordinary living rooms. Hit that button. Stay with us. You belong here. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.